Hi Yogi, and welcome to another Asana Lab with me, Oceana. In today's episode, I'll be talking to you about Vinyasas. So where did they come from? What are they? Why do we practice them? And what might be wrong with them? So because this is a slightly contentious topic within the yoga world, I've decided to split this into two separate videos. Here in part one, I'll be focusing on talking about the intentions of the Vinyasa, what it is, why we practice it, and a little bit of historical context that will inform what we then talk about in part two. So as always, I will be leaving some timestamps in the video description for you so that you do have the option to hop around. And I should also say that I've already dissected all of the individual postures that make up a vinyasa in previous episodes. I will link those episodes here, and I do highly suggest that you watch them before you come into this, because I will not be repeating any of that information here, and a lot of it will make a lot more sense if you've seen those videos. And from here, we'll dive straight into translating the word vinyasa itself. So the word, as with most yoga terminology, comes from Sanskrit. And Sanskrit, I would say, is most easily compared to Latin language, which, of course, most modern European languages are descended and rooted in Latin, and most modern Eastern European languages are rooted in Sanskrit. Now, the word vinyasa itself actually splits into two separate parts. So there's the part nyasa, which essentially literally translates as to place, and the prefix v translates as in a special way, so to place in a special way. And I personally find that because Sanskrit is a very multifaceted, very deeply layered language, it is often helpful to have a more interpretive translation as well as the literal one. So my interpretation of the word would be consciousness in motion. So we're placing the body in a special, very thoughtful way. We are conscientiously moving and transitioning between the postures, in a way that is mindful, and hopefully that sort of gives you a broader idea of what we're discussing here. Now, if you've ever gone to a yoga studio and looked at their timetable, you may have noticed that they have classes there which are referred to as Vinyasa Yoga or Vinyasa Flow. And if you were lucky enough to attend one of those classes, the teacher may have asked you to do a sequence of poses that is referred to as a vinyasa as well, just to confuse any beginners out there who attend those classes. So yes, of course, there is both a style of yoga that's known as vinyasa, and then there's a sequence of movements in that style that is also referred to as a vinyasa. And both of those tend to be attributed to one particular teacher who taught in the 20th century, who was known as Tirumalai Krishnamacharya. And it's very hard to argue with the influence of Krishnamacharya on modern yoga. He's often referred to as the father of modern yoga, and he himself was a very influential teacher of teachers who then spread his teachings to the rest of the world, but particularly the Western world. So just to name a few of his alumni, there of course is Indra Devi, who was his first female Western student and took yoga to the celebrities of golden era Hollywood. There is his brother-in-law, BKS Iyengar, who invented Iyengar yoga. There is Pattabhi Jois, the inventor of Ashtanga yoga, as well as his grandson, TKV Desikachar, the inventor of Vinaya yoga. And today, really in this video, we're focusing on the sequence of movements itself. And traditionally speaking, a vinyasa starts in a high plank position. From there, we lower down either with the knees on the floor or unsupported to our elbows, which is referred to as Chaturanga Dandasana, the four-limbed staff pose. And from there, we come into upward facing dog Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, and all the way back to downward facing dog Adho Mukha Svanasana. And the sequence itself, it's very hard to argue that it is very intelligently sequenced. It is often used, especially if you look at the Ashtanga classes, it's often placed between asymmetrical postures. So you might do, let's say, a seated forward fold over your right leg. You'll jump back, do a vinyasa, which is all symmetrical postures. And then you'll do that seated forward bend on your left leg. And really doing the vinyasa in between allows your body to come back to symmetry. And in that symmetry, you often feel the effects of the previous pose a lot more strongly. And it also allows you to feel any imbalances in your body, which is something that as we become more advanced in our practice, we do want to create a little bit of awareness around our body sort of preference, especially, if we're right-handed, we have maybe a preference of which leg we use, which eye we use. All of that factors into how we use our body and starts to create slight imbalances, which we can't necessarily sort of iron out completely, but we at least want to have that awareness in our practice. And of course, it is also a very strengthening sequence of movements, as well as mobilizing the entire body. And in my opinion as well, creates some very important muscle memory that applies to a lot of other yoga postures, as well as yoga practices that are more advanced. Now, you might think, how did Krishnamacharya magically come up with this movement? And I would say that the sort of commonly accepted origin story of the vinyasa is that it is based on a form of prayer that is known as a prostration. And prostrations exist across a lot of different religions, and they're simply done in slightly different variations. Of course, Krishnamacharya based the vinyasa on the Hindu form of prayer. And so you may have, if you've ever been to a Hindu temple, you may have seen people prostrate themselves in front of possibly a Hindu statue of a god, maybe in front of a religious artifact or a religious place of worship, such as a temple, but also possibly a site of a religious occurrence. And typically, a prostration would involve someone from a standing position coming all the way onto their belly, flat on the floor. They'll place their hands into Anjali Mudra, prayer position above the head. Then they'll come all the way back up to standing. And usually in the standing position, there might be slight variations of what they do with their hands. For instance, Buddhists will usually typically put their thumbs between their palms, and then they'll place their hands to the crown of the head, to the space between the eyebrows, as well as the center of the chest. And oftentimes people, as they're doing this sort of moving prayer, they'll often recite a mantra or a religious text, maybe a scripture, a certain verse. So it becomes a very meditative act of praying. And they'll probably repeat that several times. Now, as Krishnamacharya became more well known as a yoga teacher, of course, he had been influenced by his own practices and his religion to bring the prostration into his yoga teaching. But as he started teaching a lot more Western students who came from Christian and Catholic backgrounds, they were less comfortable with that connection to Hinduism. So he started to disassociate his teaching, and especially the vinyasa, from the Hindu elements. And I would say it's fair to say that we've seen that trend sort of continue throughout modern yoga as it's become a little bit more clinical, possibly. Might be the wrong choice of words, but we could maybe argue that it has become a bit more clinical and sterilized in that way. And of course, one of the major ways that he changed the vinyasa is that we no longer come to the floor. So especially if you're doing the more advanced version of a vinyasa, there will be no connection to the ground in between the postures. And it wouldn't be a two-part series if I didn't leave you here on a cliffhanger. So in order to find out how that particular little quirk of history affects how we do vinyasas today and how it might be resulting in rotator cuff injuries, you will have to watch part 2 of this mini series on vinyasas. Hopefully there was already a little bit of something to tease you here in this first part. Of course, if you have questions, things you would definitely like to know from the second part, then pop those in the comments section down below. And of course, if you made it this far, you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends to spread the good word. And hopefully I will see you back here next week for part 2 of Vinyasas. Thank you so much for joining me, Yogi. Bye.